Romance and fantasy. Uncomfortable pairing or fated mates? Let's talk about some of my favorite romantasies. Hi, my name is Jessica, and I would love to welcome you to my channel if you've never been here before. I'd like to start out today by talking a little bit about my perspective on romantasy. So I am a longtime fantasy reader, longtime romance reader. My favorite fantasy writers include Brandon Sanderson and R.F. Kuang, and for romance, I love everything from a historical Regency romance like the classics by Georgia Judd Heyer. I like a contemporary by people like Emily Henry, so I kind of span a lot of different genres, but when I first heard the term romantasy, I was a little bit unsure whether or not mashing those two genres together might not make it so that neither one of them could really shine. So if you are like me, and you're not really sure, or you've read some romantasy and it wasn't really for you, then stick around because I have some recommendations for romantasies outside of some of the ones that are constantly recommended. Before we get started with the list, I'd like to talk just briefly about what I am going to use to judge whether a romantasy is good. Number one, is it well written? I know well written means different things to different people, but for me, if I have to spend all my time thinking about your syntax errors, I am not going to be interested in the quality of the romance. Number two, is the world building interesting? And I don't need a full accounting of how the economy in this world works, right? But I do need to feel like it's cohesive and that there has been some kind of an attempt to understand how the world functions. It doesn't necessarily have to be realistic, but it has to be good. Number three, is the romantic relationship healthy? And this is one where I do feel like there are a lot of romances and romantasies that fail. Is there possessiveness? Is there belittling? Is there crazy jealousy? If I wouldn't accept it in a relationship in real life, then I'm probably not interested in reading about it in something that I'm supposed to be rooting for. All right, so now it's time for the list. For each one of these, I am going to give you a choice little romantic quote, which I will put up on the screen so you can decide if it's going to be a swoon-worthy romance. Okay, number one is going to be the Emily Wilde series. I have the second one right here, but the series does begin with Emily Wilde and the Encyclopedia of Faeries. And I was probably extremely reluctant to pick up this series when it first came out. I, for some reason, thought it was an epistolary novel, meaning that it was just a series of letters, which it definitely is not. I was also worried that it was going to focus on sexy fae romance, which is certainly something that's a little bit overdone in the genre, I think, right now. And it really does not do that either. The fae within this book are not the nice, sweet, sexy, growly, whatever you want to say, fae that you see in a lot of romantasy novels. They're kind of horrible. They're the fae of fairy tales, the fae that would snatch children and bake them into bread, that kind of thing. They are not nice. Our main character in this book is Emily. She is a grumpy academic who has traveled to a cold country that is probably supposed to be something like Iceland in order to study the local fairies for her titular encyclopedia. Will she charm the local townspeople? Maybe. Will she meet an adorable little fae who will bake her bread? Definitely. And will she fall in love? Signs point to yes. Her love interest is Wendell. He is a fellow professor at the university, and Emily sees him as a little bit of her academic rival. Wendell has the energy of a golden retriever puppy. He is adorable, he is sweet, he adores Emily, he loves to sew, he loves to clean. He is so charming, and Emily hates every single moment of that. She has tried to win over the local townspeople so that they will help her in her quest to write this article for her encyclopedia. And then Wendell shows up, and all of a sudden the townspeople are like, yes, let me tell you all of the secrets of our fae. So that kind of forms the beginning of the book. The romance within this book actually grows fairly slowly. They do profess their love to each other by the end of the first book, and then it grows in the second book. There is a third book coming out later this year, and I am somebody who definitely believes in the second book curse, but the second book of this series, which I have right here, was actually better than the first book. So this is one of my top recommendations for romantasy. It's very sweet, it's very cozy, has a little bit of a found family vibe, especially as you get into the second book, and I just loved it, and I think you should check it out. I'm going to recommend this for fans of historical romances and anyone who loves a good, creepy fairy tale. Now let's get to our romantic quote. He sat with me, chattering away about our triumphant return to Cambridge and ICODEF, and myriad other things, and not expecting anything substantial in reply, which is one of my favorite qualities about Wendell. It sounds odd to admit that I find the company of such a boisterous person restful, but perhaps it is always restful to be around someone who does not expect anything from you beyond what is in your nature. Lovely, so charming. Moving on. My next recommendation is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This book and its sequel, Two Twisted Crowns, make up the Shepherd King duology, and they were both 5-star reads for me. So the book is set in the kingdom of Blunder. Blunder has been lost in the mist for hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, no one has been able to leave the kingdom and interact with anyone outside because of this mist. If you breathe in the mist, you may become infected with a magical infection that will cause you to have magic powers. Within this kingdom, magic of the spontaneous kind is banned and is punishable by death. So having this infection is very, very bad. Our main character is Elspeth Spindle, which is an amazing fairy tale name, if I have ever heard one. And she has been hiding an infection that she got when she was very young. She lives with her relatives in the country. She doesn't go to town much. And she hides, even from them, the fact that she once touched a magical playing card and ended up with a monster living inside of her head. So there is a magical deck of cards within this kingdom. These were created by the Shepherd King. The Shepherd King is the mythical king who kind of started this kingdom of Blunder. And each of these cards allow you to do something if you tap them. So they might give you the ability to control someone else's thoughts. They might be able to heal you. You might gain great beauty, that kind of thing. So these are the only magical powers that are legal within this kingdom. So Elspeth, who has the illegal kind of magic, finds herself at a royal feast. And at this royal feast, she meets the head of the king's guard. His name is Raven. Raven with a Y, because fantasy, right? Raven is actually not on board with everything going on in this kingdom. And in fact, he is trying to reunite the deck and use the deck in order to end the curse that is on the kingdom. Elspeth ends up in a sham engagement with him. So if you enjoy that kind of trope, right here. And they, together along with a kind of a found family group of people from within the kingdom, they begin to search to reunite the deck to end the curse. So I mentioned that this is a duology, and it is a duology where the second book, again, is just as good as the first book. So in the second book, you do follow a different couple, but Elspeth and Raven are very much there. I thought the romance was really well done. I thought that Raven was very respectful. I thought that Elspeth had a lot of agency and was not particularly interested in just being, lovesick over the handsome guard. What makes this book special, I think, is the balance between the world building and the romance. I loved the romance, but I never felt like the world building was being pushed aside. I thought that having it set in this isolated kingdom that was surrounded by mist was a smart choice because it made it so you didn't have to build that larger world. You were able to keep the world very small and therefore have room for the focus on the romance. So I'm going to read you actually a little quote from the Shepherd King. And this is one of his verses that you have within the book. There once was a girl, clever and good, who tarried in shadow in the depths of the wood. There also was a king, a shepherd by his crook, who reigned over magic and wrote the old book. The two were together, so the two were the same. The girl, the king, and the monster they became. So I would definitely recommend checking that one out. All right, our next book. I have one question for you. What do you think about vampires? I don't mean sparkly Twilight vampires. I mean nasty, mean, ready to kill all the people vampires. So if you want an example of vampires done, in my opinion, the way they should be done, I would recommend The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. These vampires, like I said, they are not nice. They are apex predators who stalk people in the night. There are towns full of people who seem to only exist to be prey for these vampires. Our main character is Oriah, and she is a human who has been raised as a ward of the vampire king, Vincent. As such, she has something that I would consider to be a pretty big blind spot as regards Vincent himself and a lot of the other vampires. They have pretty consistently through her whole life treated her as though she were too weak to do anything, which, because she is a person and people in this world cannot fight vampires, seems pretty fair. So eventually, Oriah enters a series of trials. Why do the trials exist? I'm not sure it really matters, but she is in this series of trials where she is competing with vampires, and whoever wins will be able to ask one favor of a goddess. Our love interest is Rain, which is spelled R-A-I-H-N, because again, fantasy. He is a vampire. He is a fellow contestant in this, and he ends up teaming up with her for a team challenge, and of course, they end up falling in love. So what I loved about this book was actually less the world building, because if I'm completely honest, I am not sure that the world that is being built here holds up super well. But what I loved was actually the romance in this. The romance between Rain and Oriah is really excellent because of the fact that he shows her so much respect. Everything that goes on between them, whether it's fighting or it's something more romantic, is something that he asks her permission for, right? So he's asking for consent, which I thought was pretty refreshing for a romance novel. This is something that I would say would be a good choice if you've read some of the more mainstream romantasy fare, like Sarah J Maas and that kind of thing, but you're looking for something that has a more mature main character. Oriah is quite young, but she doesn't come across as young and naive. She's very determined, and the relationship between the main characters, to me, for the most part, was very healthy. There is a sequel to this book. It is a duology, and there is also a novella. I haven't read either one of those yet, but I am planning to read them soon, and I hope to enjoy it as much as I enjoyed this. My next choice is actually a young adult romantasy, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. So this is the first book in a trilogy. It's the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, and our main character is Evangeline. Evangeline is a character who is deeply in love when we start the book. Unfortunately, she finds that the man she is in love with is apparently going to marry someone else. So she goes to a fate. His name is Jax. The fates are kind of like Greek gods in that they have some magical powers and they love to interfere with the lives of humans. So she goes to Jax. He is the Prince of Hearts, and she asks him if he will break up or stop this wedding, because clearly her true love must be under a curse, or why would he be doing this? Jax agrees, but as his price, he asks her for 3 kisses that he can take whenever he wants. This book is just sweet. It's just this sweet, frothy confection. I loved it. There's not that much romance here in the first book, but you can see it slowly building. Evangeline was a really fun character. It's definitely a young adult book. It feels a little bit tropey, but to me, it felt tropey in the most comforting of ways. Like, of course, Evangeline's going to go to a ball, and when she goes to that ball, we are going to get insanely detailed descriptions of everything that she is wearing, and I am here for that. Of course, there's going to be a prince, and of course, there's going to be a betrothal, and also, there are vampires, which, sure, why not? I just really enjoyed this. I thought it was just a really, really sweet story, and I would recommend this again. It does have a very fairy tale kind of quality. I wouldn't necessarily let the young adult classification put you off, but it is a more young adult feeling book than one of the books I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this video. Okay, how about something a little bit different? How about something light and funny? How about A Marvellous Light? This book is a fantasy mystery that is set in Edwardian England. Our main character is Robin, and Robin is a minor baronet. He takes up a governmental post and is somehow mistakenly put in charge of being the parliamentary representative to a magical secret society. His counterpart in the secret society is Edwin. And naturally, they do not get along. There's going to be a little bit of a enemies, or at least mild dislike to lovers going on here. This is the first book in a trilogy. I have not read the other two. I don't think that all three of them follow the same characters. But this one is very, very cute, very sweet. And I would recommend it for fans of Regency romances. If you liked Downton Abbey, it's going to be that same time period. If you like a witty historical, I definitely think that you would enjoy this. And let me give you a little quote. It wasn't the physical act alone. It was the way he felt watching Edwin read. It was the feeling he had every time his eyes sought Edwin in a room and landed on an angle of the man's face. Any movement of those delicate fingers. There you are. I've been waiting for you. My next pick is one that I am certain you have heard of, but if you have dismissed it, perhaps because it's classified as a young adult novel or because of the Romantasy classification, I encourage you to give it another try. And that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This was one of my top 10 books of the year. Last year when I read it, I fell in love with the characters and with Rebecca Ross's writing and just everything about it. This is the first book in the Letters of Enchantment duology. The second book is called Ruthless Vows and came out at the beginning of this year. Our main characters are Iris and Roman. They are two newspaper reporters who are fighting over the same columnist position. So a little bit of work rivals to lovers. It does sound like the setup of an adorable rom-com. It very much is not. This book is actually very serious. Iris owns a typewriter that she has inherited from her grandmother, and she has been writing letters on it to her brother Forrest, who is away at war. Because she doesn't know where to send them, she's just been putting them into her wardrobe. Imagine her surprise when one day she gets a letter back. And I know you won't be surprised to find out who has the matching magical typewriter and is writing her back. I don't think that's a spoiler. It's the entire setup for the book. The world that they live in is at war. This is a World War I inspired novel. It felt so much like a World War I novel that if you told me it was a historical fantasy, I would have believed you. This war, however, is being caused by gods who are fighting one another. There is magic within this world. The magic isn't super well explained. If I had a criticism of the book, it would probably be that. But overall, it's a very enjoyable read. It's very heartbreaking. The writing is so gorgeous. I had previously read the first book in Rebecca Ross's last trilogy that starts with A River Enchanted, and I had enjoyed it, but it didn't like completely blow my socks off. But Divine Rivals, man, I cried so many times reading this book. It was a real ride. Iris and Ronan are eventually sent to the front. At the front, they go to the trenches. They see everything that's going on. They make some new friends in the war camps, and they fall in love. You know, and I don't know what else you need. Their romance is beautiful, especially after all the letters that they've been writing each other and eventually finding out, you know, the real identity of the person that they've been writing letters to. She's so beautiful. So I would recommend this for fans of historical romance and historical novels. And I would also recommend it for anyone who loves a good epistolary novel, because this isn't only told through letters, but there are letters and they are excellent. And I'm going to read one of them to you right now. But time will slowly heal you, as it is doing for me. There are good days and there are difficult days. Your grief will never fully fade. It will always be with you, a shadow you carry in your soul. But it will become fainter as your life becomes brighter. You will learn to live outside of it again, as impossible as that may sound. Others who share your pain will also help you heal, because you are not alone. Not in your fear or your grief or your hopes or your dreams. You are not alone. Next, I have something that I don't know if everyone would consider a romantasy, but for me, this book was all about the romance. And that is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is a novella. It's very short. It is about an alternate Chicago where magic is real, and we have hard-boiled detectives. I think it's kind of the 1940s. And we have these two women who are in love. It's not a story of them falling in love, because when we start the book, they're already in an established relationship, but the longing and the aching romance that goes through this book just really, really surprised me. I mean, this was probably my most surprising read of last year because I loved it so much and I had no expectations going into it. Our main character is Helen. She is a hard-boiled magical detective who finds herself on the wrong side of a feud between heaven and hell. Which one's the wrong side? You'll have to read it to find out, but it's pretty good. She is in a relationship with Edith. Edith is a good Catholic girl who still goes to Mass. There are speakeasies and creepy priests and demons, and as I said, angels. Not necessarily the nice kind. There is a lot packed into this very short book. I think more people need to read it. It's definitely one of the ones on my list that I have hardly heard anyone talk about, and I just love this story so much. I'm going to give you a little quote of Helen speaking about Edith. "I never told her how she saved me. I never told her how she became the dearest friend I'd ever had. I told her I loved her, but never enough. My Edith of Sparrows, my heart, my world." Okay, this next one is going to be great for fans of Gothic novels. So if you loved Rebecca, this one might be for you. If you loved one of my favorite books, The 13th Tale, this might be for you. And that is Starling House by Alix E. Harrow. Starling House is very lightly inspired by Beauty and the Beast. The male love interest is very clearly inspired by the Beast, and our main female character a little bit like Belle. But I would not say that it slavishly follows the plot of that story. But if you like retellings, that is something to keep in mind. It's kind of fun to read it with that kind of in the back of your mind that way. Our main character is Opal. Opal is an orphan. She is raising her younger brother. She's doing the best that she can in a small Kentucky coal mining town. She is a little bit of a scrappy, feisty heroine. If that's the kind of thing that you like, she definitely is. She has just been fired again from Tractor Supply, and she finds herself outside the gates of Starling House. Starling House is an estate that was built by the local coal barons. It has been mostly abandoned for a very long time, and there are a lot of unsavory rumors about what has gone on there, about ghosts that might be on the property, and about the mysterious caretakers who appear and take care of it. But Opal is very stubborn and is not going to pay any mind to that. So when she actually runs into the current caretaker, Arthur, she convinces him to take her on as a housekeeper to help him improve the current state of the house, shall we say. I was very drawn to the setting of this story. I am from Kentucky, and a lot of my relatives are from coal mining towns. This is actually based on a specific town. I thought that it felt very true to life. I thought that Alix E. Harrow is also somebody who, I don't think she's from Kentucky, but has lived in Kentucky for a large portion of her life. So it has that feeling where, you know, somebody's not just writing about a place, but they're from that place. And if you're from that place too, you recognize, and it's just something that I really loved about it. Her writing is also really beautiful. I had previously read The 10,000 Doors of January, which I didn't like nearly as much as I liked this book, but in this book, it just really did it for me. The original owner of Starling House vanished many years ago. She is an author who was married to one of the coal barons that I mentioned, and she vanished after writing a mysterious book that is kind of a cross between Narnia and H.P. Lovecraft, if you can imagine what that is like. So there are a lot of rumors about her, and it is very important to the story. This isn't strictly a love story, but the romance is very important to the story. Arthur is our male main character, the caretaker of the house, and he is someone who lives in regret for the choices that he made and the choices that he didn't make. He's very stubborn and not anxious to let anyone in. And Opal is kind of the same way, and I really enjoyed seeing them fall in love. And I do have a little romantic quote. "He is a ghost, a rumor, a story whispered after the children have gone to bed, and she was cold and hurt, all alone in the rising dark. And yet she hadn't run from him until he told her to. The house has always had a taste for the brave ones. My next recommendation is going to be something that I think is for fans of more contemporary stories. If you like contemporary romance, I think this would be one that you would enjoy. And that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. So this story is the story of, I think it's pronounced Mika. If it's Micah, I'm sorry. And Mika is a witch. She is an orphan. She has been raised away from other witches because there is a rule that witches cannot be together in case anyone notices their powers. So Mika has been working a regular job, and at the same time, she has a YouTube channel where she pretends to be a witch. One day she gets a mysterious phone call from someone who asks her if she would be interested in training 3 young witches. And when she gets to the house, she in fact does find 3 young witches who have never been trained in their powers. And of course, this is something that is not supposed to happen. And she immediately is like, well, maybe I should turn them in. But then there's a mysterious caretaker. And then there's all of these people who love these girls and who might make a good choice for being family for her. It's very heartwarming. It's cozy, it's charming. It has a lot to say about the value of a found and a chosen family. It's pretty easygoing. It's not a super stressful romance. I didn't feel like, there were a lot of super terrible breakups or anything like that. For me, the romance was less of a draw in this than the found family and the relationship between Mika and the 3 young witches that she is charged with training. So for me, this was less about the romance and more about that fantasy world, but it was very light, and it's a good palate cleanser if you've been reading some heavier things. I would recommend checking that one out. I do have a quote. "You're the only person I know who says the word nice like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all, except when it's all there is. A lot of nice people stop being nice when they don't get exactly what they want." All right, this is my last pick, and I think it's one that a lot of people aren't gonna think is a romantasy, but for me, it's definitely a fantasy, and the romance hits super hard, and that is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. So I'm gonna read the blurb on this because I think that's gonna help to explain what it is. So it says, "When a reaper comes to collect Wallace from his own funeral, Wallace begins to suspect that he might be dead. And when Hugo, the owner of a peculiar tea shop, promises to help him cross over, Wallace decides he's definitely dead. But even in death, he's not ready to abandon the life he's barely lived. So when Wallace is given 1 week to cross over, he sets about living a lifetime in 7 days." This is one of those books that people are probably talking about when they say things like, "I don't like sentimental books." And it is sentimental, but I loved it. A lot of people love TJ Klune's other book, The House in the Cerulean Sea, and I love that one too, but I love this one even more. It's very raw and full of grief. It has a beautiful love story, but it ultimately has a story of hope. TJ Klune wrote this book to help process the death of his husband. Knowing that, I think, makes it hit even harder, but even without knowing that, it really is one of my favorite books. And having said that, I feel like I need to reread it soon. This is a good one, guys. And it is a fantasy. It is about the afterlife and what that might mean. There is a door under which you can hear whispering. I don't really want to spoil anything because I think the journey of reading this book and finding out what's going on is so special. Our love interest is obviously Hugo. He is the tea shop owner. It was also lovely. Just everything about this. I highly, highly, highly recommend this. And let me give you a quote. "Everyone loses their way at some point, and it's not just because of their mistakes or the decisions they make. It's because they're horribly, wonderfully human. And the one thing I've learned about being human is that we can't do this alone. When we're lost, we need help to try to find our way again." So that kind of gives you an idea of what you would be in for if you choose to read this book, which you should. And there you have it. My top 10 favorite romantasy books. Be sure to leave your favorite romantasies down in the comments. Let me know what you thought about all of my picks, and I will see you in the next video.